Yoga, literally, the word itself, means union. When it was originally used, when we go back to the time of the sages and the saints and the rishis and the scriptures, it was about a union of the self with the divine. And so whether one utilized practices of the body, whether one utilized practices of the breath, it all was about connecting to God. In fact, interestingly, in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna talks about yoga, when he uses the word asana, to us today an asana is something that we're doing. We tend to be sweating, we tend to be working, we're stretching, we're straining, we're doing something. In the Bhagavad Gita, when he talks about an asana, it's actually something you sit on. And he gives a great deal of description to how one would prepare the right asana. And then he says something very interesting. He says, now that you have prepared the asana, you are ready for the practice of yoga. Meaning, clearly the asana is something very different from the yoga. So whether we think about an asana as something we sit on or a posture we sit in or we stand in, it clearly is just the first step to be able to practice yoga. So when you realize that that's the root of the meaning and the real meaning, there's no old yoga or new yoga. It's all about a union and a connecting. When you talk about these forms, they tend to be forms that are taking the asanas and teaching them in new ways, with heat, with music, with this, with that, whatever. We have here, for example, an international yoga festival once a year, where we have lots and lots of teachers who come from lots of different schools of yoga. Some of them are more what you'd call traditional, some of them are newer. They're all fine, as long as none of them is claiming that in and of itself, that is yoga. Patanjali gives it very clearly when he talks about the 8 limbs of yoga. We begin with yam and niyam. There's 5 of each. You could call them the 10 commandments. Things we must do, things we must avoid. This is how we live. But they have certainly nothing to do with our muscles or our bones or our skin. They're things like non-violence, truthfulness, purity. That's actually the foundation of yoga. That's our limb 1 and our limb 2. Asana doesn't come until limb 3. So when you start talking about the exercises we do, that's only once you've got a foundation already of how you're living, how you act. Pranayam then comes as limb 4. And limb 8 is samadhi, union, divine union, bliss, that ecstasy of becoming one with the divine. So all of the forms are fine, as long as no one is saying, okay, here's our way of teaching it. We include asana, we include pranayam, so we're touching on limb 3, we're touching on limb 4, but this is yoga. That's the only problem, is taking something that's 8 limbs and claiming that it actually is only this very small set of practices. Otherwise, whatever they want to offer, as long as it's getting us closer, either much closer or a little closer, in a faster way, closer in a slower way, whatever. As long as we're getting closer on some level to that union with the divine within, the divine without, then we're okay. But if we really want to practice, we just have to remind ourselves that there's a lot more to yoga than what we're doing with our body, how hot the room might be, how cool the room might be, whether there's music, whether there's not music, all of that. The happiness I get eating a chocolate ice cream cone comes and goes. As long as the chocolate ice cream cone is in my hands, or shortly thereafter, there's still happiness. The happiness begins on my tongue. Well, it begins even before it gets to my tongue. You look at it, you anticipate it, you've been wanting it, now the desire is fulfilled, I have it in my hands. That happiness goes away very, very quickly, which is why then I need another chocolate ice cream. That's the happiness that most of us live in. We may be slightly more sophisticated than chocolate ice cream. It may be our social life. It might be our careers. It might be a sense of accomplishment. It might be rising up a social ladder or rising up a career ladder. And yet, all of it is contingent upon having that thing in that moment. I'm happy as long as I'm rising. I'm happy as long as I'm getting what I wanted. The minute I'm not getting it, the happiness is gone. So that comes and goes. That's why they say in all of the scriptures, in all of the teachings, when they talk about real bliss and peace and joy, it has to come from that which is eternal and not changing. What my tongue likes, what my eyes like, what my hands like, what my body likes today is very different than what I liked at the age of 5. You couldn't make me happy today with a pack of sweet tarts. But that wasn't true 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you could have handed me a pack of sweet tarts and I would have been really happy. So what I like today and what brings me happiness today on that superficial level is very different than what used to bring us happiness, right? I mean, maybe when you were young, a fire truck made you really happy, but I could hand you a fire truck today, and it's not going to make you nearly so happy. So we can't base our lives on the search for happiness based on the things that come and go. We may get happiness from it today, we're not going to get happiness from it tomorrow, even if we get it. And of course, there's no surety that we're going to get it. And that's why all of the teaching says, root yourself, ground yourself, center yourself, anchor yourself in that which is unchanging, which is eternal, which doesn't come in, which doesn't change year by year, that's not based on my age or my interests or my desires or my taste buds or my sensory neurons, but which is based on that union with the divine. That's the only thing that doesn't change. So whether I'm connecting to the divine within myself, whether I'm connecting to the divine in the world around me, it's irrelevant. Either way, it doesn't matter. However I'm able to connect to that, which doesn't come and go, which doesn't change, which has always been with me, I can't lose it. I can't wake up one day and find it's not there. I'm not going to outgrow it. That's where the happiness that doesn't go. And that's the whole point of all of the spiritual practices. They say, we think that which we want is something in the world outside. We think that which we want is what we see on a commercial or in a store or on somebody else's body or on someone else's hands or in a shop window. But that's where all of the spiritual practices say, no, forget all that stuff. If you have it, fine, no problem, enjoy it. Having it's not going to make you unhappy. What makes us unhappy is the belief that through that, I'm going to find it. I'll tell you a quick story to end the question. There's a great story of a woman she's out in the road in the night, and she's down on her hands and knees searching for something. And this wise man walks by and he says, "Mother, what are you looking for?" can I help you? So she says, I've lost my key. I'm searching for it. He says, okay. He gets down on his hands and knees. He helps her look in the road. And after a while, he doesn't find it. And he says, well, where did you lose your key? So she says, it's in the house. I lost it in the house. And he said, well, then why in the world are you searching in the road for it? If you lost it in the house, why are you out in the street? And she says, because I have no electricity in the house. And it's very dark and I can't see anything. And outside, there's this very, very bright street light. So I thought, let me come outside and search where it's light to find it. So he says, go back in the house. It may be dark, it may be difficult, but an army couldn't find your key outside. Because it's not here. And the point of the story being that we do the same thing. We search for that which we want, the key to our happiness, the key to our joy, in all of these things outside. It's bright, it's easy, we can see it very clearly. Whereas really it's inside. But it's harder to find inside. And so we tend to avoid looking, we tend to look where it's bright. But the only place we can find it is inside. So that happens. That comes in space. But the last point I want to mention is it's not a happiness like you're gonna want to kick your heels up and twirl 24 hours a day. It's not that sort of, I can't sit still, I'm so excited, happiness 24 hours a day. It comes to much more of a level of just inner stillness and peace, and the happiness within that, rather than the happiness of fireworks.